I was basically in comms, communications, for, I don't know, 25 years. And mostly agency side. I worked with Burson-Marsteller, who was the largest agency for a while, and I worked in London and New York, and I set up their second string agency, and I eventually was chief exec. And at the time, comms was becoming a sort of C-suite discipline, and I thought it'd be quite interesting to just go the strategy route, because all the management consultancies were trying to get in on the act. So I thought, right, I'm going to go out and have a strategy agency, which I did set up. And then eventually sold that. And then instead of carrying on, after my earn-out, I ran the international operation for Edelman, who were the people I sold it to. And that was a huge worldwide job. I was, 20 plus countries, everything outside of North America. And it ended up being just exhausting, because once you get to that level, you're not actually doing the stuff you joined the business for. You're not seeing clients or doing projects, you're budgeting, or you're hiring people, or you're firing people, or you're sitting in internal meetings. And actually what you are is on a plane. And I remember one weekend, this is just absurd, it was a week, but it was very typical of my week. So one Saturday I was in Hong Kong. The Sunday I flew home. That next week in London, I did 3 trips to Europe, which included Stockholm. So that's getting up at 4 in the morning and back at midnight. And then the next weekend I was in Rio. And everyone says, oh, it's so glamorous, and it's not remotely glamorous. It's exhausting, and all you see is the inside of a hotel room, and you don't have a life. So you know what? After my earn-out, I just thought I want something different. The business had changed. My values weren't relating to the business anymore, and so I did a bit of a crazy thing. In retrospect, the way I see it is that I was in the fast lane, and I just suddenly indicated left, went onto the hard shoulder and stopped. And essentially what that meant was coming down to Cornwall. And of course, Cornwall and London are totally different. It was crazy. It was crazy. But that's what I did. And then I had the sort of long journey back of, actually, I know I've retired too young. Well, I didn't really retire, semi-retired. I like your word for it, unretired. And, what am I going to do? And it was about finding something that was of interest. And I did lots of things. I wrote a book, which turned into a screenplay, and that's a whole different story. But I also did quite a lot of project work. I did some property development. Then I was offered a job at Manchester City Football Club for 3 years. So I went and did that, commuting from Cornwall. So it took me a while, but eventually what appealed to me all along this journey was the spiritual stuff. And there's another thing I remember when I left London, driving off into the sunset, thinking it was all so romantic, thinking, I don't want a spiritual journey. This is not about me having a spiritual journey. And of course, it's exactly what I did have. And that's not easy either. But it was the spiritual stuff that interested me. And ultimately, where I landed was with this my new product called Nosti, which is here, which is all about astrology. Astrology basically believes that we're all energetic beings, and as such, we're influenced by the energies of the cosmos. And when you think about the moon and how that affects the tides, and also our bodies and our moods, particularly women's bodies, it's not that far-fetched that these massive, great planets swirling around at huge, speeds above our head are actually going to influence our energy. So what you can do is get something called a natal chart done, which maps the heavens at the moment you were born. So when you were standing on, or wherever you were standing on Earth, where was Mars, where was Venus, where was the sun, where was the moon? And it maps it on a wheel, and it puts it in a particular sign of the zodiac, because the space, the 360-degree space, is divided into signs and also houses. So every planet will be in a particular house, which will say, this is the area of your life that's going to be impacted, and a particular sign, which is going to say how it's going to be impacted. So, that's basically the idea of a natal chart. And loads of people today are turning to that. I mean, as trust in institutions like the police, the judiciary, the church, as it all falls apart, People are looking for meaning and purpose in their life, and they're turning to astrology. And it's actually quite eerie when you do your natal chart, how accurate it is. I mean, I did mine first and I thought, okay, this is interesting. And it is telling me how I tick and why I tick. And some bits you think, no. And then you think, actually, it's very, it's amazing. And so I thought, well, look, I'm going to take this further. I'm going to learn more about myself, but I'm also going to model this in 3D. Because all you get if you get a natal chart is a piece of paper with a wheel on it and some symbols that say where the planets are. And this is where I ended up. You've got the wheel with all the signs, and you've got these things at the bottom, which are your houses, and these are the planets. So you can put the sun wherever you want, or the moon. That's Earth at the top. So it's a 3D model. So I think it's a world first. I have managed to get design right registration in a lot of the key markets. I mean, that's so expensive when you're doing it on your own. So I didn't go for every market, but I've gone for quite the biggies. And I've also got trademark registration on the name, which I think is quite important. So I think I'm set if it takes off. Well, I'm half set, who knows? But yeah, so and it's probably worth talking about the name a bit, because it's called Nosti, N-O-S-T-I, and that is a short form of Nosce te ipsum, which means know yourself. It's the ancient Greek maxim, the Delphic maxim, know thyself, and it's the Latin form of that. So Nosti means know yourself, and I think that sort of it goes to explain why a lot of people are turning to it, because in a world where there's so much upheaval and insecurity, people and where just people are walking away from religion, they're still looking for purpose and meaning in their life, and they're looking at more spiritual things. So it's a huge market. Potentially it's a huge market. It's always been big in places like India and China and Middle East. It's always been deeply embedded into their cultures. Well, you've got 2 billion, 3 billion people already then, haven't you, who are potentially interested. And it's made a big comeback in the West. And it's particularly liked by millennials, who are now the biggest part of the workforce, and by Gen Zs, who are now the biggest generation on the planet. And these were the social media generation, weren't they? But there's an interesting survey by Deloitte. They do an annual survey with these two particular segments, and what is becoming very clear is that they're recognizing that spending too much time online is not doing their mental health any good, so they're coming offline. And astrology is part of wellness, and there's loads of apps out there, like wellness apps and meditation apps and astrology apps, and there's lots of VC money gone into that. But I think what is going to happen is that they're coming offline and they're beginning to invest in crystals and things like this, and this is total Nosti territory, really, because you can see what's going on. You can take them out. I can meditate with that. That's citrine representing the sun, and I can meditate with it. But I can also sort of say, move it around, and all the crystals are different. So we'll see. That's where I've ended up. But it's interesting having sort of, I think you do need to explore various ways of making your time and your life meaningful again. And once you hit on one that keeps your interest, just, keep going at it. I think we are multi-talented humans, and it never ceases to amaze me how many, and I've watched a couple of your podcasts, people who've been accountants all their lives and then suddenly turn into brilliant artists. Well, that's a different skill, I guess. And so I think there's a whole theme of really interesting, fascinating stuff in exploring things that you can't during your main career. But I also think skills are transferable into different sectors. And, we're on a treadmill, aren't we? And it's all about paying the mortgage and putting the kids in school and whatever. And if you can expand, or you can afford to, or you're lucky enough to retire early, or when you retire, I just think it's, move into other areas, because it's so much learning involved. So what skills am I using? I mean, project management. This has got, I think, 100 different parts, unbelievably, because it's all, all works differently. And I had to source them. I then had to get them from about 20 different suppliers during lockdown, which was a nightmare, as you can imagine. So yeah, project management and planning, marketing, You know, writing business plans I'm still doing. And you know, and also the creative side of designing it. I designed it and got all these pictures drawn up and got this done. And so, you know, it's all of the things that you do in a different way in business, you can reapply. I always said if you can run an agency or a company, you can run anything, a bread shop, you know, a project. So I definitely think these things are transferable. I'm not very planned. I'm an Aries, so you know, and Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. So I love new things. I love getting stuck in, you know, a bit of a warrior mindset, but not very planned. And you can sort of, you know, jump in 2 feet first, and then suddenly realise you're, you know, in a bog or whatever. So I think probably a bit more planned. The other thing is I invested all my own money in this because I didn't know if it's going to work. And, you know, it went from, you know, this started life literally as a pizza tin. This in the middle was a kitchen roll holder, and these were all ping pong balls because I wanted to see if I could make it work. And that I had to build one before I then got a prototype made. And then once the prototype made is, you know, you get the drawings done and the rest of it. But, you know, I didn't feel I could go to a venture capitalist with a ping pong ball and say, what do you think of this? So you have to get it to a certain stage. But, you know, probably you know, I would have I could have benefited from better earlier financial advice, I think, you know, whether it's doing a government grant scheme or going for seed funding earlier or anyway, but I'm talking to VC companies now. So, you know, hopefully I've got it to the stage where they think there's some value in it. Well, I'm going to stick with this. I mean, I am a bit of I get bored easily, but you know, partly because I've spent so much money of my own on it, I've got to stick with it. And also, I'm always, you know, you never know how far you are from the finish line. I mean, I always think about J.K. Rowling, that she was, you know, I don't know, dumped 90 times. Or Dyson, he invented loads of Hoovers, didn't he, before it eventually happened. So I don't think, you know, you could be a millimetre away from the finish line and you give up. And you know, you don't know how far you are from life's finishing line either. So, I mean, I just think, you know, believe in it. If you've got something you believe in and you enjoy doing, just keep it up, keep going. And, you know, fingers crossed something will happen.